Hi all. In the last two chapters, we talked about the different standards of networks and also the 5 layers model. So in this chapter, we'll switch to another topic, which is on network security. So we'll first talk about a very famous network security case called the target breach. And then we'll talk about some introduction to what are attacks and attackers to networks. And then we'll talk about how we can protect dialogues using cryptography. And also we'll look at other forms of authentication or like network protection. And then we'll also talk about firewalls and also antivirus protection. So the target breach case actually happened in the Christmas season of 2013. So Target was a large chain stores that sells like groceries, clothing, electronics, and so on. So what happened was that the hackers hacked into the POS, the point of sale systems of the Target stores, and then they install the malware on many of these POS systems, and they download them all these, or they can monitor all the transaction data. So this transaction data actually include a lot of debit card and credit card data, and they actually got the transactions including the credit card numbers of 40 million customers. And then in a separate attack, the information was also stolen on 70 million target customers. So of course that is actually having a very bad impact on customers' impression of the company. So this resulted in a big drop in the sales of of Target because customers won't trust the company anymore. The stock price dropped a lot, and also the technology officer and then later on the CEO were both fired. So you can see like this kind of security incidents are very important to a business and also to the management. This is the timeline of the Target breach. So what did Target know and also when do they know? So there is a video that you can look at that. You can view it at your own pace. But basically if you look at this chart, it actually happens over quite some time. In the beginning, so the hackers actually install the software and then kind of secretly download the information, and then they actually did it for like 3 weeks, right? So they were stealing the numbers from credit and debit cards, swiped at the store registers for 3 weeks, and then Target did not find out. And then they found out on the 18th and 19th. Then on the 19th of December, then Target says the card numbers of 40 million customers were stolen. And then a week later, then Target says PIN data were stolen. Like the PIN data on those debit card. A lot of times when you use the debit card, you might need to key in the password. So those were also stolen. So actually that is a very big security issue for the customers, right? And then later on, so another 2 weeks later, Target says up to 70 million more customers had the personal information stolen. And then the CEO offers apology in full-page newspaper, but still I think it's not helping. So the price keeps dropping. People, including both the customers and investors, do not trust the company anymore. And so another 2 weeks later, then Target actually confirms the source of the problem. It's actually the criminals gain network access through an outside vendor. So later on, I say the CFO testified before Congress about the need to convert cars from magnetic strips to chip-enabled technology. So if we look at the event, like kind of the timeline, like from December 18th to February 18th, which is 2 months later, you can see the stock price actually has dropped 11%. Since they have revealed that the card numbers were stolen. So this is kind of a brief introduction of this case and also the timeline of what happened. So you can see this kind of security issues can cost the company a lot in a very short period of time. So we will look at the target breach in a little bit more detail. So actually what happened is they have written some software that will infect the point of sale systems, and then they actually try to infect target system through a vendor called the Visual Mechanical Services. So this one is actually a company, so it's an outside company, the vendor that is working for target. But then so the attackers somehow gain access to this vendor through some phishing attack, or particularly spear phishing attack. So that means they wrote some emails that they pretend to be their friends or pretend to be some of their collaborators, and they try to trick some of the vendors employees to for example enter their password and so on. So somehow they were successful in doing that, and they gain access to the vendor's server. So the vendor server then was installed on the account had access to target's servers. So vendor server basically provides the kind of software updates to target's server, right? So then through the vendor server, then actually they gain access to target's servers. And then when all these point of sales terminals did the automatic update, right, from the server, then actually they downloaded the malware, the kind of the infected version of the POS software. So that's why once they did the update of the software, then all these POS were infected. So that's also why the hackers were able to infect so many POS terminals at the same time. They did not infect them one by one. They actually infected the main download server. Mm. Then once these malware were installed on the POS terminals, then when they are reading all those card data for transactions, they would send the card data to some other servers. This one is holding server, just hold the data, and the extrusion server is the one that will basically export the data to somewhere else. So of course, we didn't show clearly in this diagram is like there was constant ongoing command and control communication from the outside. So normally when you have malware, then the hackers would be able to like send messages or send commands to all these infected computers. So this is the extrusion server where they would export the data to, sometimes they will export it to a landing servers that usually will be um somewhere maybe overseas. Then it will be more difficult for the governments or the companies to trace. And then this after these data have landed, then the hackers could sell the data to some of the other illegal um hackers. Like sometimes we call them the card shops. So these are people who handle credit card or illegal or stolen credit card data, and they will sell these um, credit card data to other companies or other hackers, or sometimes they will just manufacture the cards, the actual cards, credit cards based on the stolen information, and then they could try to use these credit card for fraudulent transactions. One of the important lessons from this case is that network thinking is actually essentially security thinking. You just try to say you are learning computer networking without thinking about security, that actually that's not going to work, because when we are building a network, of course we know the speed and also the quality of transmission is very important, but of course even more important is the security. As you can see, it has basically enormous economic value, or yeah, have big impact on your company. So that's why when we think about the design of a network, we need to know the what are the security issues involved. So we always have to keep security in mind. Also, another lesson we learn is security is actually a process. It's not just a product. So a lot of people think like, so if I have the firewall, if I have the antivirus software installed and so on, then I will be safe. Then I don't need to worry about the other. But actually, that's not true. Even though you have the products, you need to um really make sure like you keep looking at what's happening to your network. Now in the target case, so we did not go into the details, but if we go into some more details, you will see that actually there were a lot of warnings, security warnings, um, before target file, right? Remember we said target file the breach on December 18th. So then they stopped um the malware, but then actually before that, like in the 3 month sorry, the 3 weeks before December 18th, actually they already knew there were some security warnings in their system, but they just ignore the warnings, right? So they just ignore the warnings, and then they just didn't pay attention. So that's why even if you have the products, if you are not using it correctly, or if you don't have a good procedures or process in place, it's not going to help. So that's why we need to understand security, and also how we can handle security when we are designing our networks. Next, we are going to talk about different types of network attacks, and also who are the people who are doing the attacks. So we have mentioned the term malware. So actually, it's just a general name for evil software, for software that is trying to steal your data, erase your data, steal your identity, or just damage your hard disk, and do any illegal activities and so on. So another term is vulnerabilities. So that means the security flaws in specific programs that will enable specific attacks against these programs. So usually the vendors will release patches to close these vulnerabilities. Like for example, when you're using Windows, like there will be frequent Windows updates, and many of these are patches because they find out there are some security holes or security issues with their software that might allow attackers to gain access to your system, or gain access to your program, or gain access to your data and so on. So they have to issue the patches to close the vulnerabilities. However, users do not always install patches promptly, and some users do not install at all. So if they do not update their software, then they would continue to be vulnerable. Also, there are something called the zero-day attacks. That means these attacks occurred on the first day, or sometimes we call it the zeroth day. So once it was found, then people are already using it for attack, or sometimes like people the security experts only find out after people have already used it for attack, right? So when you have this kind of attacks, then because the security experts and also the software manufacturer and also antivirus software developers have not seen the virus before, so um, the patch will not be available. So when you have this kind of zero-day attacks, that will be much more difficult to handle, or sometimes it's even impossible to prevent because no patches are available. So we have talked about like viruses. So and you might also have heard about terms like worms or other like zombies. So what do these different terms means. So I think nowadays people just use virus to represent all sorts of kind of illegal computer programs like this, right? These are like um, programs with kind of malicious intent, right? So but more specifically, usually viruses are used to refer to pieces of code that attach themselves to other programs. So they may not be a program on their own, but they attach to other programs. So that's a more specific definition. But as I said, usually people use it in a more general sense. So another more specific term is called worms. So the worms are standalone programs that do not need to attach to other programs. So they can just walk around themselves, right? A lot of times the worms will copy themselves from one server to another server. So they can also kind of move from one server to another server. So we call them worms. But again, I think these days people just use virus to represent all of these. Um, so typical propagation methods, or sometimes we call it the propagation vectors, for computer-to-computer transmission for these viruses and worms include email attachments. So this is very common these days. So they will send you an email and then with an attachment which is an exe file, but you may thought you may think it is an image file, then you try to open it and then you will be infected if you are not careful enough. And sometimes on your mobile phone, it will again pretend to be an image or pretend to be a PDF file, but in fact it's actually an APK file, for example, to install something on your phone. So sometimes the viruses can infect your computers if you visit some websites. So if your browser does not have good security protection, then actually once you go to some websites, then some software could be automatically downloaded or even executed on your computer. So sometimes that might happen even when you are visiting some legitimate websites, because those legitimate websites might also be hacked by the hackers before you visit them. So of course, when you visit social networking sites, that might also happen. Or sometimes when you're using messaging apps, when people send you something on WhatsApp, WeChat, then actually those programs um, or those links may actually also contain viruses. So there are also many other ways of doing that. Sometimes it's based on like the USB drive. Like a lot of people basically just feel free to plug their USB drive anywhere. Right? So when you plug your USB drive to someone else's computer, right, then actually you may get the virus from there. Right? And sometimes, like when you are using those charger, right, if you are using a charger provided in I don't know, in a place that you may not trust very well, and actually sometimes there may also be virus inside. Right, then that may also happen on peer-to-peer file sharing. When you are using something like BitTorrent, then the virus actually can spread themselves. So usually these might require some human callability, which is slow, but which actually is um very weak, right? So a lot of times the weakest links to your computer is actually the user. Like user easily tell passwords to their friends, and user click on the um agree or approve buttons, like for executing whatever files that they download. And so we need to be careful about this. And there are also some worms that can directly propagate to other computers. So they can jump to the victim host directly. So usually the target host must have a specific vulnerability for this to succeed. So no action is necessary on the part of the victim. So the user, even the user did not do anything, did not click on any link or click on any um, kind of allow or agree button. the victim's computer could still get affected um, or infected. Right? So usually this happens on many of those server computers, right? Because when you're running a server, you may be actually having some programs that are running, and those programs may be listening to traffic on some ports, right? So when there are vulnerabilities there, right, because of some software, you may have a database software or a web server software listening on some ports, but somehow if people find a way to actually attack your server or infect your server through those um, port, then actually those worms can actually quickly infect many computers, right? Because once I infect a new computer, and this new computer actually can then also help me infect some more other computers automatically. So when you have this kind of attack, the growth is very fast. So there are also other types of malware, like there are mobile code on web pages. HTML web pages can usually, contain JavaScripts or other scripts. Like um, then in the little screen here, actually we have a very simple script here, right? So it's a simple VB script that very few people use on web page now, but it's just an example, right? So we may have a script like this. So scripts are usually called mobile code because they are downloaded with the web page. But of course, in this case, what we are talking about mobile here is actually not about mobile phone, but it's just using the word mobile in the sense that they download together with a web page, but then it's also some sort of programs. So scripts are normally benign, but may be damaging if the browser has a vulnerability. Usually, the browser will protect the user from the scripts. Like the scripts have limited authority to do damages to your computer. But if there is um, a vulnerability on the browser, then actually the script can take advantage of that and try to control your or infect your computer. So there's another type of malware called the Trojan horse. So you know the story of the Trojan horse where they hide the soldiers in the large wooden horse, right? So Trojan horses in IT basically they are programs that disguise themselves as system files or some legitimate program files. So when you download something then it seems to be legitimate, or sometimes they are just system file, like pretend to be some of the system file for Windows that normally you think they are okay, right? Even if you see that in the task manager, you think they are um, legitimate programs that are running there, but actually they they are actually doing something illegal, trying to steal your information when they are running on your computer. So a Trojan horse usually can not propagate to other computer on its own initiative. Right? So there are many spyware trojans that collect sensitive data and also send the data to an attacker. So some of the trojans actually will not damage your computer. So even if you have been infected by this software, you may not know. Like just like sometimes like the spyware, right? So even if you are infected, you will not know until maybe you got infected too many times with too many viruses, then your computer will become slower and slower and slower. Then at that point you might find out that you are already infected with so many malwares. So there are also some programs called downloaders. So these are malware that downloads a larger malware program onto the infect computer. So a lot of times they would download a bundle of malware. Uh, so once you get infected with a downloader, then the downloader will basically download a package on your computer, and that package may contain 5 to 10 more um, different types of malware, and then they will install it on your computer, install all of them on your computer. But normally they will not download like too many, like 30 or 40, because once you are downloading too many, then people will find out, the user will find is becoming very slow, and some of these will be easily picked up by some sort of antivirus software. So that's why they may not like run all of these. Even if they download a lot, they may not run all of them on the computer at the same time. But anyway, these kind of downloaders are also very kind of troublesome. Like once you get infected, like with uh the downloader virus, then you actually do not know how many malwares have been installed on your computer, how many of your system files were actually Trojan horses and so on. So once you get infected with this, then and a lot of times with other viruses as well, once you get infected, then the best way to do is probably just to reinstall everything on your computer, including the operating system. Mm. Now, of course, like there are also spam emails or some kind of spam contents. So these are unsolicited commercial emails, or sometimes it's just like other um, emails, like phishing emails that we'll talk about later. So technically, they may not be some sort of malware, but because they are not software, right? But they are just some unwanted contents. So after propagation, the viruses and worms will execute their payloads. So the payloads are basically what they um, actually want to do to your computer, where they want to steal data, where they want to lock your computer and get ransom, or whether they want to just destroy your computers or destroy your data files for fun. Right? So the payload is basically the main program that they want to do on your computer. So of course, we know the malicious payloads can do damage. Payloads can erase your hard disk. They can send users to, for example, some porn sites. If they mistype your URLs, they may hijack your browsers. Whenever you try to search something, instead of say going to Google, it will go to their specific search engines. Yeah. So they could basically or sometimes um they can hijack your browser such that it will pop up many advertisements that will also bring income to the hackers. So of course, like even malware without payloads can do damage. Not all malware has payloads. Right. Some actually they do not have payloads, but they're just somehow there. Right. But anyway, like it's not good because they can still cause your computer to run slowly or crash. Right. So of course, like it would be best to avoid any viruses or worms as much as possible. So a lot of times we will say humans or the users are one of the weakest links on the security of computer networks, right? Because a lot of times a lot of users are not familiar with how the networking or how security works. So they may just share their password with others. They did not pay attention to, for example, some of the token code. Then they tell their token codes or password to others very easily. Or sometimes they just don't like to install the updates, like the patches or antivirus software or firewall on their computers. So so that's why people sometimes say they have a term called social engineering, that is to trick the victim into doing something against personal or organizational security interests. Basically, tricking the victim to share password or to um, kind of tell you something from some confidential organizational data, or to open some email attachments that would um, again install some malware, or direct the victim to visit websites again that would install some malwares onto a computer and so on. So that's why it's um very important to educate users on system security, like if we want to have good security for our computer networks. So we have talked about phishing attacks. So it's a sophisticated social engineering attack in which an authentic looking email or website entices the user to enter the username, password, or other sensitive information. So I think every one of us probably have received this kind of phishing emails before, right? So they pretend to be, say, from Cafe Pacific or from HSBC or from bank, say Citibank and so on, and saying your password is going to expire, and then you should update your password, and then there's a link there, but then the link is not going to the actual legitimate website. It's actually going to a hacker website with a similar outlook. Then if the user did not pay attention to the URL, right, then they would just enter the information, right? So, and also in recent years there are also more targeted, or sometimes we call spear phishing attacks, that actually they have customized content, right? For example, they pretend to be coming from someone you know. So instead of, say, spamming you with an email, or like saying like your password is not working, they actually could do something like they pretend to be your boss, right? So, or something like that, right? Or they could just, for example, they pretend to be your boss at work. Then the, because many of this information are easily available, like if I check on some websites, or if I check on LinkedIn, right, I may be able to find some of your connections. Then I just pick some of their names, right, and then I try to email you using some names you know. So instead of sending an email from someone you don't know, I pretend to send email to you from your boss, and then saying like you should go to this website and download a file of the new document related to the company. Then a lot of times you may not suspect, you just click on the link, because whatever your boss asks you to do, you may have to do it quickly, right? You do not have to decline that. So once you just follow that, if you did not look at the, say, the from email address carefully, then you might be tricked very easy. So these kind of spear phishing attacks are increasingly common, especially for hackers who have a specific target. So I want to particularly target someone, right? Then I could easily go to social media sites, go online to look for his friends and look for where he's working, and then pretend to be his friends or co-workers and so on. There are also different types of threats on the network, including credit card number threats that we have talked about. So the hackers could use the stolen credit card numbers to make unauthorized transactions. There is also identity theft, so that involves collecting enough data to impersonate the victim in large financial transactions. And sometimes it may not be large financial transactions, it's just like impersonating you to get a credit card, right? Or to apply for a loan and so on. So sometimes it can result in much larger financial harm to the victim than credit card theft. So, because sometimes you can actually use that to withdraw a large amount of money from a bank, for example, or to get into a transaction with a business partner, and then after you receive the payment, then you don't deliver the products, for example. So this kind of identity theft actually could result in much larger loss, and it may take a long time for the victim to restore his or her credit rating. So what exactly is hacking? So I would say nowadays actually the word hacking has many different meanings, because for example, like sometimes we talk about hackathon, then this hackathon is not about illegal activities, right? It's mainly about computer programming. So a lot of times when people say this guy is hacking, then we are just actually trying to say this guy is writing computer programs, right? So nowadays I would say hacking has a much more general meaning, but if we are specifically talking about security, then hacking is usually about say definition here is about intentionally using a computer resource without authorization or in excess of authorization. Right? So it's like it's intentionally using something that you are not authorized to use. Right? So actually, in that sense, it actually does not involve it may not involve like writing any computer programs or using any software to hack into, like so-called hack into other people's computer. Right? It can be any like illegal activities, or like again activities that you are doing without authorization. Uh, so again, there are many different definitions of hacking, and we also have something called a white hat hacking, right? So we try to find out the security vulnerabilities of a system, and then you report it to the company for some reward sometimes, right? So, but anyway, for the next few slides, we'll just talk about a few examples based on this particular definition. Okay. So for example, is it hacking you will find your username and password on the street and log into the account? So of course, normally you don't find some username and password on the street except like they are like Wi-Fi password. Then normally if they are written there, then you can use, right? But then if you just log it into a say a Gmail account, right, without based on the data, based on the credentials you find on the street, right, then you log in. So is it hacking? So normally that's considered hacking because you are not the owner of that account, right? So when you are using these kind of credentials that other people lost, so then actually is kind of not something you are supposed to do, right? So this one is considered hacking. So is it hacking if you log in your legitimate email account, not in your own account, and then suddenly find that you can see the email of other users? So that might be because of a bug in the email software. Then you spend about 5 minutes looking around, reading other emails and so on. Is it hacking? So in this case, we will say yes, because you are intentionally using your computer resource in excess of your authorization. Normally, it's not something that you are supposed to see. So if you see that, you should not just um, keep reading for so long, right? You should try to restrain yourself from doing that. But of course, I know a lot of times it's difficult. So if you click on an email link and find yourself inside Internal Revenue Service server, so it's kind of like some government website or government data. So is it hacking? So for this question, I would say it actually depends on what you do after you find yourself inside the server. If if after you find yourself inside the server, you did not do anything else, you just close the connection, then again based on this definition, it's not hacking, right? Because it's not intentional, right? So you just got accidentally went into that server without kind of the intention to to do so, right? So it's like in that case, like we are not it will not be considered hacking. So is it hacking if you log into an account that the user gave poor protection to by giving the password say 123456? So the answer is yes, right? Because again, you are doing it intentionally, and then also again, you are not supposed to access that user's account, right? But then you still access it. So that's basically you are doing it without your authorization. So is it hacking if you just want to test the security of your bank and discover that it has a poor firewall? So actually, this one somehow depends. I would say based on this definition, if you are just testing the firewall, right? So you may be running a software to scan the port and see which port is responding and so on. So when you're doing this, but you are not actually like going into the bank system and do anything. So when you're doing just testing the firewall itself, it's not considered hacking, right? But of course, again, when you are using the more general definition of the term, then some people consider it as hacking as well, just like the white hat hacking that you just mentioned a few slides earlier. So is it illegal to test a company's firewall on your own initiative, find a vulnerability, and tell the company that you tell them about it if they give you $1,000? So if you are doing it like this, is it hacking? So the answer is, or actually the question here is it illegal? So of course, whether it's illegal or not, it would depend on the laws of that particular place. But in general, if you are doing it on your own initiative, and then you try to um, threaten the company like that, say you will tell them about it if they give you money, and of course, like what you didn't say is, you will tell others about it if they did not give you the money, right? It's some sort of like threatening. So again, like based on that, there is also kind of not a very good intention to do that, right? Sometimes, but again, whether it's illegal or not will depend on the law. So a lot of times we are also saying the law a lot of times is not catching up with the latest technology, right? So we will need to look at the law to see whether it's illegal. But in general, of course, we try not to do something like this. Like usually the white hat hackers will also try to look for vulnerabilities for those companies that are giving out rewards. So many of these companies now have the reward plan, right? So they encourage the white hat hackers, kind of the good hackers, to try to find out the vulnerabilities and tell the company about it such that they can fix it. Right? So they were actually able to like make their software more secure by relying on these white hat hacker communities. Yeah. So if you are caught hacking and then if you are judged guilty, then you may have to pay penalties, right? So the penalties actually depend on the amount of the damage done. So a lot of times it could be easy to do damage accidentally, right? So you may once you are doing something that you are not authorized to do, like you may be deleting something accidentally. So it's actually sometimes quite dangerous if you are doing something without authorization, because once people find out, like then they will ask you to pay for it. So there are different stages in an attack. Like the first step usually is the exploit, is the actual break in. So how you can break into, say, a company system, right? That part of course is not easy, right? You have to at least get some um, user credentials, like username, password, in order to get access to, say, an organization's network system. Right? So the tool used for the break-in is also called an exploit. So after the break-in, then the hackers usually will manually exploit the resource. So actually, the difficulty of this would depend on the kind of the privileges of the account that they are having access to. So of course, if you are getting like the admin rights to a system, that of course is much better than just a regular user's account, right? So a lot of times, like once you break in, then you leave a Trojan horse or other program there that will allow you for continuous automated exploitation. So you leave a program there such that you will receive command from you in the future, and also you will continuously do some more exploitation of the different resources and so on. So one of the very popular types and also doing an attack that is doing a lot of damage is the DDoS attack. So it's actually what we call the distributed denial of service attack. So denial of service attack is actually attack that tries to bring down the service of a company or a server, right? So it's called denial of service. For example, if I have millions of people trying to download something from your web server at the same time, or have millions of people sending emails to your company's account at the same time, then actually that will bring down your say web server or email server, it will make it very slow, right? So many hackers actually try to do that, right? Kind of as a, again, as a way to blackmail the company, or sometimes like some hackers are doing that like to just for just some websites that they don't like, right? Sometimes some politics related websites or some government websites that will have this kind of denial of service attack. So usually how do you send, like, say, millions of requests to a web server at the same time? So you need to rely on some bots, right? Some software robots running on different computers. So normally the attacker, sometimes also called the bot masters, will first infect many computers with the robots. So we will infect many computers, but um, the robot, after infection, the bot will just kind of sit on the victim's computer without doing anything except for listening to traffic. So it's just like running there, just waiting for command. And the bot master is the one that will send the command. So it's controlling all the bots. But once they think the is ready to launch the attack, then it will just send the commands to all the bots at the same time, right? And then all these bots, because they are on different computers, right? So they can actually easily just access the server, say for example, access the web page of this target company at the same time. Then if your web server could not deal with the sudden increase in number of access, then your web server will be down. And the attacker may say call you and say, you will pay me $200,000, then I will stop the attack, and then you will resume your website. Right. This kind of website attacks or denial of service attack are particularly important for say e-commerce sites, because once your website is not working, people cannot buy things from you, then you will be losing your business, and your revenue will drop. So it's very common for this kind of website. And then it's also common for some large websites. If you do it for like Facebook, YouTube, social media, other social media sites, if you have this kind of denial of service attack, it's also making these companies like unhappy, right? But of course, like these company servers are very difficult to attack because they are already dealing with like tens of millions of users every second, right? So if you want to um kind of bring down their service, you will need much more bots to do that. But anyway, so the bot master will control the bots, and then the bots will say they are on different victims' computer, and they will send the attack package to the victim computer. And because these bots are running on different computers, and these computers have different IP addresses and so on, so it's actually quite difficult for the victim computer to stop it. Because if you are just attacking a web server from one IP address, then it's easy. The victim can just block your IP address, or just block a range of IP address, then the problem is solved. But then if it is um dealing with like many um different bots, then actually you cannot block their IP addresses, so it's actually difficult to deal with. But in recent years, actually the protection against denial of service attack actually have much improved. So that's why this kind of DDoS attacks actually have become less successful than the past. The bot master can also send patch or functional upgrades to the infected computers. So these bots that are running on the victim computers, usually they don't do anything until they get the commands from the bot master. So sometimes these computers are also called the zombies. So there are many persistent threats to network security. There are long-term attack on an organization that can last for months or even years. Some hacker groups they just target specific organization and just keep on attacking. Of course, if we are talking about financial institutions like banks and so on, they face security potential security threats every day. Like hackers are trying to hack into bank system every day. So they basically need to make sure they have good security process in place. And many of these hacker groups actually use extremely advanced techniques these days. Usually begins with a spear phishing attack, and they will get the credentials of say one or two users, and then from there then they try to get into the system. So a lot of times when you have your security setup, you may have different layers of security, but the hackers will try to break them layer by layer, right? So of course if you have more layers, then it's much more difficult for the hackers to break. So this kind of persistent attacks on organizations are of course more difficult and expensive to do. So usually they are done by professional hacker groups, or sometimes they're usually done by national governments. So we have heard in the news that many governments actually are trying to have different types of attacks on other countries, or sometimes on their own people, right? Some of anyway, so many governments are doing this kind of hacking, so that's why have been talking about cyber war for many years. Like so, they're saying that the next world war could be more on cyber security, just trying to hack into other countries' system, and then once you hack into other countries' computer system, you might be able to do a lot of things. You may be able to bring down their power plant, like or bring down their networks and so on. So once their computer networks or the power plants are down, right, then they are of course at a very much disadvantage. So as we said, so usually this kind of large scale persistent attacks are done by governments, but sometimes it can also be some criminal groups. Well funded large criminal groups, hacker groups, they could have a target and then kind of keep trying to exploit the security issues. So who are these hackers? So old school hackers are usually driven by curiosity, a desire for power, or peer reputation. So a lot of times people just hack because they say it's fun to do, and they want to show that I could do something that other people could not do, right? So they also want to gain some peer reputation. So that was quite common, say if we talk about this like 10, 15 years or even 20 years ago. Right. But I think today, most hackers are actually career criminals who hack for money, right? So they have for credit card information that they could sell, or they um, have some like ransomware, right? So you might have heard of that. So they try to lock your data or lock your computer, and then they will tell you you could only unlock your data if you pay say 1 Bitcoin to a particular address and so on. So most of the hackers nowadays hack for money, right? Or they do it for some other people. So criminal attackers are well funded, and they also have an online criminal infrastructure, just like any other criminal societies, right? So they have structure, and then they have different tasks. They have like different experts focusing on different aspects. Like some will be focusing on how to do phishing, some will be writing software and so on. So they may actually purchase malware from other hackers, or sometimes they could hire experts, right, to write particular software or do other things when needed. So it is actually not illegal to write malware because it's just like writing programs. And suppose it like you have the freedom of speech, like so you can actually write this kind of malware. So and but on the other hand, it is actually illegal to release malware against a particular company. So you release some malware that is targeted at the company, and then usually then is considered illegal. But again, whether it's legal or illegal actually depends on which country you are living in, right? So based on the laws in different countries, then they may be different. But this one is kind of just a general understanding. So of course there's a caveat here. So if you write malware for someone to use in an attack, so this conspiracy and carries the same penalty as the attack. Right? So if you basically work with someone, right? If you write the software and you when you are writing it, you already know someone else is going to use it in an attack, then you need to be careful, right? So besides hackers, other types of attackers could be the employees, ex-employees, and other insiders. And a lot of companies actually are facing a lot of security issues from this group of people. So some of the current employees or ex-employees are basically not happy with the company. They try to do a revenge because they don't like the boss or they think they are underpaid by the company and so on. Of course, sometimes it could also be threats, theft, where they try to steal the company's data again for money, or they still so they sell it to others, right, for money, or sometimes they steal your customer list and then sell it to another company and so on, right? Or sometimes they just um get some information like for fun or for other reasons. Anyway, so many of these employees or ex-employees, they could do a lot of damages to your computer's network or to your data. uh, So they are extremely dangerous because they already have access, they already have username and accounts, they have username and password, they are already very familiar with your system, so they know where to do different things. They also know how to avoid detection, and also they are in general trusted by the organization. Right? So um, if you like kind of read many of these security stories, you will find that many of these security issues are related to these employees or ex-employees, whether they are doing it intentionally or sometimes then they were the target of the hackers, and the hackers stole their credentials and then logged in the system and then started to exploit the system. So IT and security employees are actually the most dangerous because the IT people, they actually know your computer codes. So there are so many stories about like IT employees, the programmers, basically deleted the computer programs after they leave a company because like maybe they were fired, then they just delete the code. And some of the programmers may um plant some traps in the computer codes such that if they leave the company, then no one else would know how to fix those problems. Now, of course, like security employees are even more dangerous because they are familiar with all the security measures, so they know how to set up things. They know how to bypass all the security um, protections and so on. Right. So of course we said ex-employees usually are dangerous, so all assets must be terminated before leaving. So you must terminate the employees kind of accounts and privileges when they are leaving. Otherwise, if they still have access after they leave the company, like sometimes like although even sometimes when they are leaving, you think they would not get your data, they will not damage your data and so on. But you never know, like maybe sometimes later, maybe say 2 years later, that somehow that ex-employee suddenly has a need to get some data, that they could still come back and log into your system and get the data and so on. So of course we need to be careful with the outside vendors or contractors, right? So these people actually have access permissions because when they need to do something with your server, for example, that they would need to have some access. Just like the target case that we talked about is actually um, from the vendors, right? The vulnerability was actually in the vendors. So these contractors and vendors also need to be given only the um, permission that they need, and also these permissions must be terminated once the project is done. So on the horizon, we know there are also cyber terror attacks by terrorists, right? So many of the terrorist groups are actually using cyber attack. Like again, could be on government websites, could be on large company websites, or could be on the networking infrastructure of a whole city or even country, and so on. And so as we mentioned earlier, there's also cyber war between nations that are going on. Um, so these are of course dangerous because they are very sophisticated, right? The government again or the terrorist hackers, these are again experts, so they are very sophisticated. Yeah. Also, they are dangerous because the focus on doing widespread damage instead of committing isolated crimes. So these are usually also dangerous because they may be trying to again damage your whole country's infrastructure, right? Or damage kind of some large websites trying to hack into large banking system, or hack into power plants, or hack into large government websites, and they try to have larger impact. So normally these kind of attacks are difficult and we need to be careful. So next we'll talk about how we can protect our dialogues using cryptography. So one of the concepts is called the symmetric key encryption for confidentiality. So when we have a symmetric key, so that means just like we have one key, symmetric key. Key of course from the name is a when you're saying symmetric, that means the same key, the, the same single key is being used by the sender and also the recipient. Right? So say A wants to send a message to B, so send a message hello to B, and then I will encrypt it using my key. So a key you just treat as like a password, but usually a password you don't have a specific link, right? But then usually in security or especially in cryptography, when we talk about key, so it's a password with a specific link. For example, like 16-bit, right? Okay, it could be like 64 bits, 128 bits, and so on. So then you need to encrypt the message and then send it through the network such that like when people are reading your message on the network, if they do not know your key, they will not be able to decrypt the message. Right, so it's just like if you have an eavesdropper here, so because this message is encrypted, people without the key would not be able to decrypt it. Right, so that's why the eavesdropper will not be able to read your message. And then once the message is received by B, if B has the key, then B can decrypt the message and read it. And so this is what I just said in the previous slides. Um, B could decrypt the message and read the message. Um, and one thing to note here is this key is symmetric, so the same key is being used for encryption and decryption. So just a quick summary. So a single key is used to encrypt and decrypt in both directions. So most popular symmetric key encryption cipher today is one called the AES. So the key length must be at least 100 bits long to be strong. If your key is too short, that means people could actually break it very easily because they know how long your key is, and then they can just try different combinations. Of course, if you think about the extreme cases, is if the key is only say 4 bits, right? Then in by 4 bits we can only represent 2 to a power 4. That means 16 different possible combinations. Then if I know your algorithm, then I just use the key. Like I just need to try it like 15 times, right? Your key with 4 bits could only be from say 0 to 15, right? or 2 to the power 4, so 16 different combinations. So a computer program can easily try all these combinations. Because nowadays the computers are very fast, and especially if you are using a very strong CPU or even GPU for some kind of decryption, you can easily do a brute force method. So if your key is too short, it's not very helpful. Right? People could easily break it. Another thing that encryption can do is um, what we call electronic signature. So what you can do is you can add an electronic signature to your message, and then you encrypt the message and your signature together. So when you do that, you basically again, just like a previous example, we already have confidentiality. That means the message could only read by the recipient. But the other thing is when the message is opened by the recipient, the recipient would also see your electronic signature. So then they will know that you are the one actually who put in that signature there. So besides the confidentiality, the electronic signature can also add the authentication. That means you know that person is the real person who is writing the message. And also adds the message integrity. That means you can ensure that the message has not been changed during the transmission. So in later chapters, we'll talk more about how exactly the electronic signature works. So another way to protect your message during the transmission is to use SSL, or sometimes you call the SSL TLS host to host VPN. Right. So VPN, of course, we know is the virtual private network. So actually what happens is between your two hosts, for example, your mobile phone to a web server, then if you are using this VPN or based on SSL or TLS, what you're having is during your transmission of your data, you try to cryptographically protect your transmission path. So that means everything here is being protected, is being encrypted, and then when you send it to the server, and the web server will decrypt it. So the reason is that when you are transmitting something on the internet, it can be seen by many people, right? It could possibly be seen by everyone or anyone who is operating one of the routers in between, anyone who is listening to the network traffic, right? Because again, the internet is public, right? So it's what we sometimes call it also the untrusted network, right? So or sometimes it can also be the wireless network. Right? If you are using your phone even before you arrive the internet, right? You have the data that you are sending to the Wi-Fi, right? And the Wi-Fi, if you are not using your home Wi-Fi, you are using a Wi-Fi in a cafe, right? Then the owner of that Wi-Fi wireless access point could also see your traffic, right? So that's why many websites are using this kind of SSL TLS for the all this web data transmission. And actually the name is very long, right? But the shorter name actually is just HTTPS, right? You know, when you use HTTP, sometimes um the protocol actually become HTTPS. So that's why it's the basically the secure HTTP is the HTTP based on um SSL TLS, which is actually the secure socket layer, right? So they add the security between your browser and also the web server. So that's why when you're logging into say some for example online banking websites, then they will require you to use HTTPS such that no one on the internet could see the say password or other data that you are transmitting. All they could see would be the encrypted data. So of course then this normally when doing this they will not use the symmetric key, they will use the asymmetric key. So we'll also talk more about that in later chapters, like how the asymmetric key works. Okay, so now we'll talk about other forms of authentication. So here are some general authentication concepts. So the supplicant or kind of like the users which try to log into a system in general, right? So we call it a supplicant. And then your server sometimes like will have a process called the verifier. Right, so the supplicant will send the password, like username, password, or some other credentials information to the verifier, and the verifier will check whether this person um, is the actual person that the supplicant is claiming to be, and then you will say accept or reject um, this authentication or this person. And sometimes you also provide the authorization. So I know who you are, then you are authorized to do this and this, but you are not authorized to do that and that, and so on. So one way of authentication is password, or sometimes we call reusable password. That means you can use the password, the same password every time you log in. So of course, that's the most common way of um, authentication on the internet. Like you just type in your password. So which are strings of characters. So they are typed to authenticate the use of a username or account on the computer. So they are usually used repeatedly, that you can use it multiple times, and so they are called reusable password. Of course, the benefits of reusable password is that it's very easy to use and users are familiar with it, and they are also inexpensive or most of the time free because they are built into operating systems. Of course, the problems of reusable password is that they are very easy to hack. They are in general weak. So hackers actually use some password dictionaries that include common passwords, names, and simple variations, such as capitalizing the first letter and adding a number at the end and things like that. So because many hackers actually have some examples of what people will use for passwords. They find that, for example, 123456 is actually a very popular passwords that people use. Another very popular password is just password. So many of these are actually common passwords that they have collected in dictionaries, and they can use these very and to crack very easily. Of course, now computers are much faster than before. So in general, some dictionary attacks can crack almost all passwords in seconds or minutes. Of course, if your password is very long, very complex, then it's more difficult to crack. But then I think here is that all passwords basically means passwords that could be found in dictionary very easily, right? Or you are just using variations. So a password that can be cracked using a dictionary can never be adequately strong, no matter how long it is. So passwords should be long and complex, should have a minimum of 8 to 12 characters, because if your number of characters is too small, then actually it's very easy for hackers to find out using a brute force method. So you should use mixed case, digits, and other keyboard characters. So for example, you could have something like this. Then if you have something like this, then it's much more difficult to crack and can only be cracked with brute force attack. That means trying all combinations. Like if you are not using something like this, then you can simply use a dictionary words, right? Then or just variation of dictionary word that would be easier. But something like this, then you have to try out all the possible characters. And then if you think about it, for each character, it could be like uppercase letter, lowercase letter, numbers, or the symbols. Then in general, you have like 70, 80 possible characters there for each character. Right, say 70 or 80 possible values for each character. And then you have that say to the power, how many are there? To the power 12, right? Then that would be a very large number, so it's not easy to crack. So if you want to do something that is in general very difficult and often impossible to crack. But of course, if you have a password like this, it's very difficult for you to remember, right? So when you have long complex password like this, then you cannot remember what would you do? you write it down on a memo, or you write it down somewhere, right? Or you store it on your phone somewhere, right? And then that would become another vulnerability because people may find your piece of memo, or they may, like, once they hack into your phone or they got your phone, then they could also see that number, see that password, and so on. Right? So some other people actually say, like, if you have a long um password like this is difficult to remember. Sometimes it's also possible to use, say, if you have really long password that is like a sentence that you could remember. For example, if I use my password as something like password should be long and complex, then there's so many characters there. Then of course, like, if the hackers are also trying to use a dictionary. Even if the hacker is trying to use a dictionary approach, normally the hackers may not try a combination of so many words together. So that could also be one way to do it. But anyway, so these kind of reusable passwords are somehow problematic, and also people are using so many passwords on different websites, and sometimes when one and because we are dealing with so many websites, a lot of people tend to use the same password across multiple websites. Of course, the problem is once you get compromised on one website, then people would already know your password and that they could use it for many other different websites. So it's just a quick test. Whether the password below are adequately strong. So this one, yes. This one, probably no. This one has many characters, but it's not long enough, so probably no. This one is a combination of two dictionary words. Like Honolulu is just a place in Hawaii, right? So it's just a combination of two dictionary words. Although it's quite long, it's also not very good. This one is okay. It has a mix of uppercase, lowercase, again, brownstone, but it does not have numbers or symbols, so it's still not very strong. But of course, it's better than one that is using just lowercase. Right? So overall, passwords, like especially this kind of reusable password, can only be used for the least sensitive access. So that's why a lot of websites, right, that are dealing with more sensitive information, for example, like banking websites, a lot these sites actually require two-factor authentication nowadays. So besides your password, they will also need you to type in a second password, or sometimes type in your date of birth, or sometimes use a token device, and so on. So there are other forms of authentication where the goal is to replace these reusable passwords. So one thing is like access cards, then people could use it to say for door access, then also use it for computer access. Like in some organizations, actually you could only log into a computer if you have a physical card with you, right? So some of these like proximity access cards that do not require physical contact are often used, like our octopus card, right? So it's using RFID, so you do not have physical contact. You just need to tap the card there, and then you can use it as one form of login. Mm. So biometrics are also becoming increasingly popular. So biometrics basically are using your body measurements to authenticate you. So of course that can be based on your fingerprint, based on your pupil, right, looking into your eyes, right? Or sometimes it can be facial recognition. So this kind of biometrics actually vary in cost, precision, and also susceptibility to deception. Like some of the iPhones actually would use the face recognition, but then when you are wearing a mask, they may not be able to recognize you easily. Or sometimes like people have tried that when you um make that first person's face using some clay or using some rubber, and that you could also use it to fake the iPhone. And I think it's fingerprint, right? Fingerprint of course is safe, but then for example when you are sleeping, someone actually could basically quietly take your hand, okay, use your finger to unlock your phone. That happens a lot, like between husband and wife, right? If they want to find out whether the other half is cheating, right, they could unlock that person's phone, right, using the fingerprint while he or she is sleeping. Like compared to password, if the password is inside the person's head, you could not take that thing easily. But then if you think about facial recognition or like fingerprint, like people could steal it if they have close physical contact with you. So just a little bit more about this fingerprint. Uh, it's inexpensive, so the technology is also mature, but the precision is not like highly accurate, it's just moderate. So as it's deceivable, sufficient for low risk uses. So like unlocking the phone usually is okay. Like this example is like this little kid is trying to unlock the father's phone using the fingerprint, and the father is sleeping such that she can play the video games and so on. But of course she could also potentially steal some data. So usually like this might be used on notebook computer or phone, then it may be better than requiring a reusable password. Like it's faster, right? And also, as you said, like the iris recognition, so it's based on the patterns in the colored part of the eye. So in general, it's more expensive, but it's more precise. And it's difficult to deceive the system. And also, facial recognition has become increasingly popular these days based on your facial features. So it's also a bit controversial because that can be done um, surreptitiously and also without the supplicant's knowledge, right? Because a lot of times you could have the video like looking at the persons without the user being without the user noticing, right? So and also people are talking a lot about this privacy issue about facial recognition. So this is something that is possible, but again is um kind of controversial. Another type of authentication is based on asymmetric key. So when we are doing this, the verifier will send a challenge message. So it will send it to the supplicant or the user. So the user who claims to be someone, the true party, will try to encrypt the challenge message with their own private key. Then this is the response message. Then this response message will be sent back to the verifier. So maybe the website that you are dealing with. At the same time, the certificate authority will provide a digital certificate of the true party, and this digital certificate also contains the public key of the true party, which is public information. So in asymmetric key, there is a pair of key. One is the public key, one is the private key, and they could work together. So in the last step, then the verifier decrypts the response message with the public key of the true party. So this response message was encrypted using the private key, but we now try to decrypt it using the public key contained in the true party's digital certificate. So if this produces the original challenge question and challenge message, then that means the supplicant knows the true party's private key, right? So it's the private key again is something private that other people would not know. So when this is done, the original message is back. That means the public key on the digital certificate is actually the pair of the private key that the supplicant has. So then in that case, it's considered verified that the supplicant is accepted as the true party of what he or she claims to be. So that's how digital certificate works. So just a quick summary here. So the supplicant will encrypt the challenge message with the supplicant's private key, and the verifier will try to decrypt the response message with the true party's public key. So if the decryption works, I get back the original challenge message after the decryption, then that actually shows that the supplicant knows the true party's private key. So must be the true party. As we mentioned earlier, some websites or apps are using two-factor authentication. So the supplicant needs two forms of credentials. For example, if you have a debit card, sometimes even when you're using a debit card, you also need to type in a PIN, right? So that means you need to have two authentication. One is you are physically holding the card. The other one is you know the password. So that's one example. Another example is like some apps will require you to have your fingerprint and also type in the password, right? And so fingerprint and password, so that's two-factor. And some websites will require you to input your password and also date of birth. So that's also two-factor. Another example is a token. So some websites will require you to have a token device. So it's a small device that will generate a code um, based on different times, based on the current time. So you need to enter that token code and also your password at the same time to a website. So this is also quite popular among banking websites. So this actually provide a stronger authentication, but of course like this will not work if the attacker controls your computer or control your phone. So even when you have your password plus say an email token or password sometimes plus the SMS message, it still will work, right? And also another possible um, kind issue is the attacker can also intercept the authentication communication, right? So in a lot of hacking cases, the attacker actually tries to also listen to your SMS at the same time. They try to intercept your email, intercept your SMS message. Then sometimes they will forward the SMS message from one phone to the attacker's phone, right? Then if they are doing that, then they could also get your second factor, right? So this kind of two-factor authentication are better, but they may still fail. So now we will talk about firewalls. So the general operation of firewall is like this. So suppose this part is kind of your organization's network. So all network going into your organizations or internet packets going into your organization network first has to go through this software, which is the firewall. So we call it the border firewall. So when the packets are coming in, then there's filtering. So we call it the ingress filtering. Right? So if the packet is malicious, then it will be dropped. And a lot of companies, these firewalls are actually also look at egress filtering. So look at the traffic going out, because we also want to monitor that someone is stealing your data. Actually, again, in the target's case, they have already noticed this kind of outgoing, kind of unusual outgoing traffic for several weeks, but they did not pay enough attention to that until 3 weeks later. So that's why it's also important to see like what's your outgoing traffic, whether there's any unusual outgoing traffic that may indicate someone stealing your data and transferring your data to some outside servers. So the firewall will inspect all the incoming packets. So if the incoming packet is a provable attack packet, then it will not be passed to the computers. It may just be logged in a log file. And then if a packet is kind of shown to be legitimate, then it will be sent to the server that is intended to. So what happens if a provable attack packet arrives? So as I said, it will be logged and it will not be sent to the server. What happens if a legitimate packet arrives? So of course it will be sent to the intended recipient. So what happens if a packet that is probably an attack packet arrives? So it's not a proven attack packet, but it's possibly an attack packet. So what do you do with that? So of course actually your software, your firewall could decide whether you want to allow that or you don't allow that. Of course, if you allow that, then there is a risk of some attack on your computer, right? But if you block all these kind of suspicious traffic, then of course the implication is that you might be also blocking some legitimate packets at the same time. So that's why when you decide to accept or reject some packets, you need to be careful. But of course, as a user, we don't deal with that at the packet level, right? That would be too much. But usually we'll try to do it based on the application level or the port level. I want to accept the traffic by this application, or I want to accept traffic going into this port, and so on. So there are also states in a conversation or sometimes like a communication. So normally like in network transmission, we say there is a step of opening the connection. So when you first open the connection, usually is more risky. So you must have the authentication of the other party. So it could be a compressed process, right? So that means when you try to again log into a bank account, right? The first time going into a bank website, when you do the login, then this one is the connection opening step, and this one is potentially more risky. But once you log onto a website, you can do other things without further like typing your password or further authentication for every transaction that you are doing, right? So normally the ongoing communication is less risky, right? So there's no need for heavy authentication. Sometimes you may still need further authentication, but it's not like that. You need to do it for every transaction, right? So that's why many firewalls are actually doing something called the stateful inspection. So that means it will use the concept of communication states. It will pay more attention to the risky state, but then for the less risky state, for the ongoing communication, you actually would not care too much. So a stateful packet inspection, or something called SPI. So we basically is trying to look at whether the packet is attempting to open a connection. So if it's yes, then we'll actually do more authentication, right? So usually this is about 1% of all your packets. And then if it's not trying to open a connection, actually we will not, as we said, we will not care too much. So it's around 99% of all packets. So what would a firewall do with a packet containing a sync segment? So last time we kind of briefly looked at that. So this one sync is trying to open a connection in the TCP layer. So when we are doing that, then this one actually is we need to go to this side. We need to do all the inspection. So what happened is trying to close a connection is sending a thin segment. Now of course then it will be going to this side, so we will not be doing too much inspection. So what would the firewall do with a packet containing a pure acknowledgement segment? So a pure acknowledgement, so again, normally it's not opening a connection, then it will be going to this side. So you just look at this. So if we are trying to open the connection, then the packet will be passed through the access control list. So sometimes called the ACL. So there's a list showing what kind of packets should be accepted, what kind of packets should be rejected. So normally it could be based on IP address, based on port, based on the protocols used, or based on the application that is using it, and so on. So basically that there is an access control list. So if it's passed, then it will accept the packet, and then it will establish the connection, right? And then of course if it fails, then it will reject the connection. So an access control list is something like this. So it can be like having different rules. So this one is saying for all IP address, if it's going to surface 25, so port number 25, then we'll allow the connection. If it's from this IP address, so root 2 from this IP address 10.47.122 and so on. So if the server is 80, so probably going for the web server, then we allow connection. Then rule 3 is for all other IP addresses, for all IP addresses, and then for all services, that will disallow connection. So that means if you look at this, so the rules actually go from top, right? So that means for any servers, any IP address, if it's service 25, like basically for email, right, then it will be allowed. If it's from this particular IP address, and if the server is 80, so this one is probably for the web server, then it's also allowed. And then for anything else, then the connection will not be allowed. So that's what this simple access control list is doing. So a quick question, what will the SPI firewall do if the destination host is this one, 10.47.122.79, which is this one, and the server is 80. So of course, in that case, the connection will be allowed because it satisfies rule 2. Question 2, what will be the firewall do if we are the same IP address and the server is 25? Now, of course, it will also be allowed because it satisfied rule 1. Right? So what packets will match the third row? So as we have mentioned earlier, so that actually will be for all other messages, all other packets that do not satisfy rule 1 or rule 2. So that means service on any other ports. The packets on any other ports will be rejected. Also, packets on port 80 that are not from this IP address will be rejected. So if the packet is not trying to open a connection, then the work of the firewall is easy. So if the packet is part of a previously permitted connection, then we just accept the packet. So we assume that it's still from the same authenticated sender, so it's fine. So if a new packet is not part of a previously permitted connection, then we just drop the packet. So this part will be much faster, and also it will, if we are doing it like this with a stateful packet inspection, then the workload of the firewall will be much slower. So we'll just have more examples of this. So suppose you have a table like this with your approved connections. So these are connections that you have already opened and approved, right? Based on your open connection request. So there's another table keeping track of all the connections that are open. Like this, one connection that is from this IP address, this port number to another IP address and another port number, right? So this one is a second connection. So again, but from this IP address, this port to an external host, right? With this IP address and this port. So again, these are your internal computers, and these are the external hosts, external computers. Then, for example, what if the internal IP address is 128.171.34.5? That's this one, and the external IP address is this one, and the source destination addresses are 4747 and 25. So basically, it's matching route 2 or connection 2. So this packet is from a connection that is already open. So this packet will be approved. So what happens if the internal IP address is this one that is actually not on the list because this one is .9 and this one is .5. And then even if the external IP address is approved and also these port numbers are approved, but because this IP address is not the same, so this is not an existing open connections, so this packet will be rejected. So there are some limitations of stateful packet inspection firewalls because they are kind of limited primarily to examining socket data. If you are dealing with other types of data, especially things that do not require connections, like if we are talking about UDP instead of TCP, using UDP, like you are streaming data and so on. So basically, when you're doing that, you don't have connection, right? They are connectionless, so you cannot detect that. So also you cannot detect what applications are actually using port 80 based on just your um, kind of stateful packet inspection alone. So you need to actually have other methods to look at which application is actually using that port, right? So also it cannot identify problems in the stream of packets, right? So once the connection is open, basically you just approve everything, right? Like from that connection. So you cannot identify further problems in the streams. If the streams actually are containing, say, malware, you could not detect that. So people are now talking about next generation firewall. These are actually better firewalls that use deeper inspection. They will examine all the fields in the internet layer and also a transport layer. So it's not just looking at whether it's connection, opening connection or not. It's actually looking at all the fields um, in the header of the layers. And also we will examine the application layer content as well. So you will know actually which application is using the particular port. So when you do this, it will require reassembling application messages from multiple segments. So of course it will take longer because it's doing deeper inspection, but it's also more secure. So as we said, one of the major points of this next generation firewalls, or sometimes called NGFW, so it's the application awareness. So it can identify what application created the traffic, can base rules on application policies for specific applications, and it may even understand malware applications. So and also these next generation firewalls have the intrusion detection system functionality. So can detect suspicious traffic. So we can actually look at the traffic pattern. So it's just not just looking at the packet one by one. So you can detect suspicious traffic patterns and also log these suspicious traffic. Also, um, it may try to monitor for illegal kind of unusual activities. If there are suddenly an increase in like scanning of your port numbers and so on, then you can notify the security administrator of high threat suspicious traffic. So some of these actually even have data mining capability. So but one of the problem for this kind of intrusion detection system is sometimes they are generating too many messages. Like they produce many messages, and many of these may be false alarms. So when you have too many false alarms, that may actually dull the vigilance, right? Then the security staff actually just got too many messages, then they just ignore the message. Again, just like the target case that we talked about earlier. So there's also possible intrusion prevention system in some of this next generation firewall. So, so these are actually intrusion detection systems that drop packets that are suspicious, but also for which there is a high confidence that they are attacks. So, besides detecting the kind of the intrusion, it will also try to prevent this kind of intrusion by dropping some packets that are suspicious. Another feature of next generation firewalls is reputation management. So you can access whitelist or blacklist in external reputation management databases to inform decisions about packets to and from listed sites. So you can actually look for these kind of external references to help in decision making. It also supports some of the traditional firewall functionalities like NAT, so network address translation, and also VPN traversal, so the virtual private network. So these functions that are supported in kind of the stateful inspection firewalls are also supported in next generation firewalls. So next generation firewalls also need to make sure the speed is okay, right? Because it has to do a lot of processing, right? Because it's processing per packet, and so the work is heavy, yet it must be able to process at the highest speed of incoming transmission lines. Otherwise, it will be slowing down the traffic. So traditional firewalls are general purpose computers. So basically just a server computer there that will do processing with step-by-step software. So next generation firewalls usually are hardware that is particularly built for firewalls. So they can do some of the processing in hardware um, instead of doing it in software. So when you do it this way, it will be much faster than doing the same processing just in software. So that's why next generation firewalls are usually much faster than the traditional firewalls. So finally, we'll talk about antivirus protection. Firewalls work on packets and groups of traffic, so it's mainly looking at incoming traffic at the packet level. And usually antivirus software, they are doing filtering on the files that you have received. After you put the packets together as a file, then the antivirus software will try to look at the files to see whether it's containing any particular signature or virus. So antivirus filtering usually is not limited to viruses. So it actually looks for all forms of malware, but usually we just call them antivirus software, so it's easier. But a lot of times you will look for adware, spyware, and also other types of malicious software. So when the antivirus software is trying to do a scanning on your computer or on some files, what it's actually doing is to actually looking for some particular signature in the file. So it's actually looking for byte patterns that characterize individual malware programs. So usually this antivirus software, they will have the virus and spyware definition database. So this database actually have analyzed many of the known viruses and malicious software, and they will look for particular um, byte patterns that appear in each type of virus. For each type of virus, there can also be many different forms. They are not all exactly the same file, but usually they have some portion of the codes that are identical, like for the same virus. Right? So that kind of code, then it becomes a byte pattern that can be detected in the file. So the antivirus software basically is looking for any of these byte patterns that are found in the virus definition files. Right? So there are, of course, now too many malware programs. Right? There are so many malware programs that have been built over a year. So it's actually getting more and more difficult to test for all the malware program signatures. So this scanning actually become more difficult. So a lot of times you may be doing something like the quick scan. So it's looking for the more popular ones, but the less popular ones sometimes may not be checked. Also, many malware programs mutate. They may even sometimes when they do the mutation, as you said, there are many forms. They may not change their signature, but sometimes they may also change their signature. So it's making the antivirus more difficult. So that's why if you just have the antivirus software is not enough. You need to have it together with the firewall, and also the user has to be very careful, has to be vigilant. Besides signature detection, antivirus software also do behavioral detection. So it will analyze what the program is attempting to do. So for example, if a program is trying to reformat your hard drive or trying to install some other software or trying to change your operating system setting, then it will actually stop the program from doing that, or you will at least warn the user or ask the user to confirm. So if it's when appropriate, it may also delete some of the programs that are taking this kind of action, or this antivirus software may quarantine this kind of suspicious programs. So it may also run some programs in a sandbox, like some sort of environment that it cannot escape from to study it. So this antivirus software actually is trying to look into both, as we said, the behavior and also the signature of the files. Alright, so that's the end of this chapter.